Hey everyone, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I am your host, Grenadier One. As always, I hope you are having a good week. It's been a slow one for me, and I think for the world news cycle in general as well. We are possibly getting a break from all the action, so to speak. But that has consequently left me without really a hot button topic for the show this week. So I'm going to reach into a couple of things to just make a general point for our content today. I am going to avoid talking about a couple of the criminal cases that are going on right now, or, things that just kind of popped up this week, just because I don't quite have enough information about them yet, so I don't want to be kind of going off into uh, grounds that I don't know enough about. But anyway, so as you see from the title of the show, this week we are talking about truth. In this context, what I mean is the story of truth of an event or activity as it is told by someone else to others. For example, reporters or the media, or how information is conveyed really more publicly, I guess you would say. Oftentimes, those two things will diverge somewhat as people are just not very good at recalling information sometimes. And that's, not always the case, or sometimes it is the case with a person always. Sometimes it's just that they forgot something, for that particular story that they're telling. Sometimes people take shortcuts and they simplify information to kind of move a story along, or because they just don't want to get down in the weeds, lost in the details of things. And those are innocent or at least unintentional things that can cause a story to be something slightly different from what we would define as the truth. Okay, and perception also plays a significant role. People can relay exactly what happened as they saw it, but they can also taint their memory with preconceived notions and ideas, which affects the retelling of the story. That may not be intentional or nefarious, but it can sometimes turn out to have that end results regardless. People make mistakes, and mistakes have consequences, unfortunately. Um, as you can see, even before we get to people intentionally distorting or altering information to retell a story, there are significant ways that can make a story different from what actually happened. So when you read things, keep this in mind. It may not be, it's going to be a version of the truth. It may not be exactly 100% the truth. Now, I was prodded to this topic this week by a few things that have happened in the media, as well as uh, some very dark events in U.S. history. I was thinking on a few things that had me going back and reading a document from 1970. So let me get into that first to kind of guide us through the point that I'm trying to make this week. The book, or the report that I'm talking about, from 1970, and it concerns the Kennedy assassination. RFK Jr. announced his candidacy for president this week, and that just kind of got me in mind to go read this, along with some other things that I was reading and watching. What I'm talking about is commonly referred to as the Torbit document. This was written in like 69 or 70, and it was published in 1970 by William Torbit. And I suggest that you go read this, as it has some very interesting information in it. I can't say that the information is 100% accurate, or at least as I believe it, which is kind of relevant to what I'm talking about today. But in this document, the author lays out his case for who killed JFK and why they did it. And it is very compelling, and it contains some very often overlooked bits of information. Much of it comes from Jim Garrison's prosecution and his investigation as he was trying to put together a case there in New Orleans. If you're familiar with the movie JFK, or perhaps you were maybe living through that time and followed that case, you'll know what I'm talking about there. But a lot of this stuff gets glossed over or really left out of the more popular documentaries or books about that day in Dallas. And that's kind of critical to the point here. People tend to present information that supports their positions, and they downplay or exclude information that does not. So, writers or documentary makers, of new books or new presentations about the assassination, they don't necessarily acknowledge what Torbett put together, what he put out there, because he may have uncovered some things that conflict with their theory of the case. So they don't want to mention that fact, or Torbett, because they don't want to steer anyone away from their idea and their concept. Anyway, there's some very good points made in his work. One of them I want to highlight, because 20 years ago when I first heard about this document, and I had not really read the entire thing here until recently, I'd just always seen excerpts from it and just people quoting it and things like that. So I knew what it was. I knew about it, but I'd not read the whole thing. But this stood out to me this week when I read through this part. So let me read this line and I will explain it. And I posted this on Gab the other day, if you may have saw it, but I'm going to go over it here. In this, he says, the forerunners of the Solidarist have been described by James Weschler of the New York Post and other writers before and during World War II as the Ukrainian fascist. The Solidarist expanded this group to include all Eastern European exiles, including those of various religious denominations. End quote. So what is he talking about here? This is one of the groups that Torbett identifies as being part of the cabal to get JFK. The Solidarists, he says, are a group of exiles from Tsarist Russia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Now, in previous looks or previous examinations of the JFK assassination, this is sort of third tier, at least in terms of responsibility or focus. Everyone kind of overlooks this group. It's like, oh, okay, they're also mentioned. The others are looked at as the bigger players. It didn't really mean much in 1970, but because we get to these other groups, for example, a group within the FBI called Division 5, the infamous CIA front company Permindex, the Swiss bank Credit Suisse, and another company called, oddly enough, the World Trade Center Corporation. Now, all those names are very interesting, and they just keep popping up when it comes to international events. But I found it most interesting that a group labeled as Ukrainian fascist would be mentioned in light of things going on today. If you followed the Steele dossier, the Trump impeachment, you might recall that a lot of that information, most of that information, didn't come from Russia, as they said. That's not really where it came from. It came from Ukraine. There were Ukrainians involved in passing that bogus information via conduits like John McCain. And now we're fighting a war against Russia in Ukraine on behalf of the Ukrainians, or at least allowing them to fight the war with our stuff. I just find that very, very interesting. Kennedy was said to be working to improve relations between the West and the Soviet Union, and this contributed to his death, among other things. Lots of the usual military-industrial complex people are mentioned in this document as, playing their part in the cabal. And that's something that lends credence to what Torbett wrote about, looking back on it with hindsight. In light of what we saw with Trump and this current situation in Ukraine, I just find it very interesting that those same same groups involved with opposing a president come to play. But anyway, I wanted to bring that document up so that you'll go give it a read. And be aware, as I said, there are some flaws in it, at least in my opinion. And that is really more of the takeaway or the important piece for relevance to today's topic. Many times Torbit uses the phrase has ties to or has links to when he is trying to draw a connection between players in the cabal. And this is very common, and Torbit's most assuredly not the first to do that, but this should cause you to kind of pause and consider what is being said there. It goes to the point of, is what you're seeing truthful, or is it just part of a story? Is it just a perception of a story or presentation of information? And again, it may just be literary shorthand to avoid branching off into rabbit holes, but it could be that the connection that is trying to be presented is just very tenuous, and it doesn't mean what the person says that it means. Now, in many of the cases in the Torbit document, I think they're just shorthand. I don't think that he's necessarily trying to obscure something or make something up that isn't necessarily there. I think he's relying on a lot of information that was presented to him by others. There are some places that I believe, he's relying on these words from other people, some testimony or things like that, that is perhaps, indicated connections, particularly where he's referring to organized crime. And those connections are likely detailed in like criminal cases or, things that prosecutors might be saying to him kind of off the record, whatnot. We know there's a connection there, but we can't legally prosecute that kind of thing. So it's likely there, but they can't definitively draw the line. That kind of thing. So I'm not throwing a lot of cold water on the document. Information. It's just using it as an example of what to be on the lookout for when you evaluate a source of information. It's what you should keep in mind when you're reading these things. Now, for a long while, at least in my lifetime, it was looked at as this was something that you really only had to do with more fringe publications or sort of, I guess you could say, outlandish claims, You would read things about UFOs or the Kennedy assassination or other, conspiracy type topics, and you would say, well, I want to be very careful about what I believe here. But, this is something you have to do with mainstream media nowadays. And it's not just the big stories either. We've crossed the line way, 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 way back where the media is not a critic of the government and have officially and publicly become the defender and mouthpiece of government. And just a case in point this week, you may have heard the story of Arnold Schwarzenegger going out in his neighborhood and filling in a pothole and that he says was damaging cars and causing problems on his street for months. He says it's been out there for several months. It's causing damage, whatnot. So he got his people and they went out there and filled this pothole in. The media, rather than just kind of reporting this with a chuckle and maybe taking a little jab at City Hall, falls all over itself to be a fact checker and to toe the line for City Hall by saying, well, it was not a pothole, it was a service trench for electrical work. Well, who cares? That's a distinction without a difference. Now, I'm sure if you hit the hole and it cracked your oil pan, you wouldn't give two shits about what it's called. It's just a hole. You want to know why it hasn't been adequately filled back in. It doesn't matter what it's called. Call it whatever. It's still damaged your car. And Arnold, to his credit, points this out in his response. He went on Twitter and responded and says, the hole's been there since January. So for 3 months, the city has allowed this to be a problem. And if the media will lie about these little things and tote the government's water, how can we trust anything that the media is saying about anything? And the answer, of course, is that we can't. Every story is suspect. We have to read between the lines and determine what we believe to be true based off its consistency with what we know to be true. We can't rely on anything to tell us an honest and straightforward story. This week, Fox News settled out of court with Dominion Voting for close to $800 million. And I know many people have abandoned Fox News. I don't really watch them anymore. Occasionally I will turn over to watch Tucker Carlson if I just happen to be sitting in front of a television at that time of the night. Or I'll watch something that is replayed on YouTube or something like that. Just not a source that I necessarily trust anymore. To the point of the show. Now this lawsuit was stemming from the Fox coverage of the 2020 election and the voting issues that were alleged to involve irregularities and problems with Dominion voting machines. Now, of course, the left is dunking on Fox News because Fox is kind of the stand-in for what is called conservative, and I put that in air quotes, news, and is presented as the alternative to left-wing mainstream media. Now, the cool kids know the reality of that situation, but I digress. I will defend Fox here, however, because what the left is doing is they're ignoring that this settlement does not really mean anything other than Fox News pays some money to Dominion. They're not admitting anything in the settlement. They're not saying anything other than, okay, we settled, let's move on. I mean, it's literally that in their statement that they released after this was announced. If you followed this case, it was clear that the fix was in, and the jury was going to be allowed to see and hear things that really were not relevant to anything other than tainting their opinion of Fox News. That very little was reported and came out of the pretrial hearings about Dominion, which I found very interesting. And you know, what data and information did Dominion have to produce? What were they required to put out there? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what was discovered in that effort by Fox, but because it wasn't really reported, it wasn't really talked about. The only thing that you heard coming out of this trial, which was really because of the extent that I followed it, I didn't really pay much attention to it because I didn't really care. The only thing that you saw was damaging to Fox information. Nothing damaging to Dominion came out, and you know that can't be true. You know every corporation, every company in the world has things that don't look good about it. You know, if you look at it, the information is there. If it's presented, it doesn't look good. It may not necessarily be, you know, accurate as it's presented, but it is the information. Every company has that. It's just the nature of the things. We all have things that we don't want other people to know about because it might look bad about us, right? But it looks very much to me like Fox sized up the situation and said, okay, this looks like we're not going to get a fair hearing. Let's cut our losses. You know, I don't know. That's my opinion. It's my look at the thing. Like I said, I did not really closely follow the information that came out of that trial. But one would have to believe that Fox felt like it had a case and it could beat Dominion prior to these pretrial hearings. Otherwise, they would have just settled out of court at the beginning of it and avoided any negative coverage of their own, like CNN did with Sandeman, with the Covenant Christian Academy kid that they accused of being a racist. They just said, okay, fine, we're going to settle out of court. We're not going to go to trial and drag this all out. They knew that they didn't really have a case. They knew what they had done to that kid, that they had defamed him, and so they settled. Fox, like I said, you would think, well, hey, we're going to go to trial. We're going to see what we can get here. You would think that they had to believe that they had a case there. Otherwise, they would have just said, okay, fine, let's agree, we'll write this check and we'll move on. The fact that they fought this at all leads me to believe they believed there was smoke there, that something was going on. Again, read between the lines, read a little deeper. I think you can draw some conclusions there. But at any rate, what does this mean for the average, hardcore right-wing hate-monger like you and I? Well, I think it means we're moving into late-stage terminal ball cancer. This is what the end looks like. I watch Fox News coverage of the whole thing from the election night silliness to the post-election allegations, and at no time did I see anything other than fairly carefully crafted reporting that didn't cross the line. I thought they were being very, very careful about that. And when they interviewed people who were alleging things more serious, they were critical of them. And in fact, it was believed by many that they were gatekeeping the information and not allowing more to be told. People from our side were being critical of Fox for not presenting the story. I just find that very interesting that everyone seemed to be going against Fox there on that. But it looks very much like that didn't matter, and lawfare on a mass scale is now going to be used to contain information and prevent any questioning of the official narrative. And couple this with the Alex Jones case, for example, and you can see why anyone reporting the events of modern America has to be very vague and throw around the word allegedly all the time. And even that's not going to save you in the courtroom if what you're saying does not toe the party line, does not toe the official narrative. It's just another axis in the full spectrum war against reality. Not only do you have to question everything that you see from the mainstream, you have to question everything, period. You can't trust anything. There are far too many people who do not have the integrity to resist being pulled into compensated messaging. I'll call it that. There are rooms filled with people who are getting paid to lie to you online and make sure that you stay within the lines of the road to serfdom. Now that's all I got time for today, guys. Like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab and the Mothership, and I will see you on the next episode.